Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us as your PLC facilitator for our second of the Race to the Top of the Valley Consortium Days. Today what we're going to do is go over our agenda and talk about your role as a facilitator for your particular group. We're going to start off meeting at Sargent School for our next meeting, which will be Friday, October 12th. Our first meeting will start at 8 o'clock and it'll run from 8 to 8:30, which is a general session. So for you as a facilitator, your role is just to attend and be with your peers. From 8:30 to 8:45, we'll do what we're calling transition. Allows people to spread out. Our hope is that we'll have all the PLC lists and room numbers hung in a central area, so you'll be able to see where your room is and if there's any new members who will be joining you. We then have in the morning session 2 breakouts for your particular PLC group. The first is from 8:45 to 10:30, which is a focus on objectives. There's a built-in break from 10:30 to 10:45, and then from 10:40 to 12 o'clock is our second breakout session. We did build in for all staff an hour and a half for lunch, so we will be having a good amount of time for lunch. The Sargent PTA has graciously volunteered to have lunches, and they'll be providing it at a nominal cost there, or groups may go into Center or Monte Vista. When we come back, we will come back at 1:30 for a second general session, and then follow that up with 2 more breakout sessions for your PLC groups. And those would be a focus on the Race to the Top district grant, which we'll talk about in that general session. And then finally, from 2:45 to 4 o'clock is a focused discussion on PLC choice topics that your group will be able to do. And so this agenda should be attached with the email to this link for this video for you to be able to see it. Thank you for volunteering to be a facilitator for our second Race to the Top of the Valley Consortium Professional Development Day. We really appreciate your ability to work with your peers and for you to volunteer for this process. One of the things that by volunteering you've agreed to do this, you also will be provided a stipend that will be paid through the BOCES. In the attachment to the email, there's a form that you're required to fill out in order for us to pay you the additional funds in this time. So we'd ask that you not only turn in to Superintendent Welsh the Race to the Top Valley stipend form, but also a email list of all the participants who were in your group. We're wanting to make sure that we can continue to have contact lists throughout the rest of the year. The third piece that we would ask you to do is at the end of the process that you have someone who is willing to volunteer to be a facilitator for next month's PLC opportunity. And for that, we need to make sure that contact information is collected so that we're able to contact. So thank you again for being a volunteer and doing this, and we appreciate your time and effort. As a facilitator, one of the roles that you'll take on is really leading your group in a discussion towards helping develop and continue to grow in each of the 3 different breakout sessions that we have. The first breakout session that you'll be facilitating is a focus on objectives. And so as many of you know, last month we really focused on introducing that lessons. And in a letter that went out to all the staff, we asked that staff bring 5 examples of their classroom objectives that they used in the last month. The goal of this hour and a half for our first session is to use the rubric that we introduced last time called Effective Lesson Objectives, and using that to then have it as a model for the discussions to go on. And so what we're going to ask you to do is, hopefully as a facilitator, you'll be willing enough to start with your first objective and compare it to the rubric that went on. Going through, does it clearly describe what students will be able to do? Are they challenging yet obtainable? Can usually be taught in one class period? Followed the prescribed curriculum? And are written in a language that students can understand? And finally, are communicated to the students. And so what we'd ask you to do as facilitator is walk through each of those questions with your first example objective and get feedback from your group members. Do they think this obtained it or not, and why? We'd ask then that after you do a sample for that you break your group either into a large group or smaller groups and allow them an opportunity to use the rubric to really investigate and discuss their objectives that they've brought and get feedback from their peers. Your time that we have for this is from 8:45 to 10:30, so you have a good amount of time to make sure that people really can get in depth and talk about what makes a good objective, what they'd like to change, and how to be successful. I think part of any good PLC, though, is that we must create a safe environment for them to feel comfortable about what's going on. And so as you start this first PLC session, we would ask that you review your norms that you set with the group. If you have new members, make sure that introductions are done, and then dive into really an in-depth review of your personal objectives. For PLC Breakout 2, we're going to focus on daily formative assessments, and this is going to be a very similar activity as it was for the objective. It's again providing you guys an opportunity in your like curriculum areas to have a discussion around what are DFAs that you've used over the last month and how effective they've been. So much like the objective, what we'd ask you to do is use yours as a facilitator as the first example. Go through the objectives and the rubric that was created and supplied with the attachment of effective daily formative assessments. We'd ask that you go through each of the 9 criteria created by our rubric, using yours as a model, and then being able to reflect on, was that an effective DFA or not? And as with the objectives, even if it is not your finest objective or DFA, sometimes having ones that you already know might have strengths or weaknesses is a good way to help facilitate and get more dialogue out of your group. Once you've done a run through and a model of your own with your group, then we ask again to either as a whole group or breaking up into small partners or triads that you go through their 5 that they've brought and being able to then compare them to the rubric that we've provided in the attachment. For the third breakout session as a facilitator, we are going to come back after lunch to do a general session. And in that general session, we're going to really talk about the next steps in the processes. As you know, the state had won a Race to the Top grant, and much of that money that we're using is what we're using to provide these 5 training days throughout this year. Well, we know that money can't last forever. And so one of the things that all the districts have done is talk about going after more and greater financial grants. And so one of them that we're looking at is what's called the Race to the Top district grants. And so after lunch, when we come back to the general session, Superintendent George Welsh will introduce that process and what the grant is looking like to all the staff. And so one of our goals then in this third breakout session is to ensure that staff have the opportunity to provide feedback. In one of your attachments to this email, you'll see that there is a feedback chart that we would like you and your group to go through and to discuss and talk about what your opinions or feelings are about how this draft is coming together. Now with this grant, it is on a short timeline. We have to submit it actually by the 3rd week of October, and so feedback from the staff is critically important at this point to be able to do that. So as a facilitator, we'd ask that after the general session, we again come back to your room, help facilitate the discussion with your staff around those questions that are in the 3rd attachment. And then our final, 4th and final PLC breakout group is really about providing all the staff an opportunity to network and work with their peers with regards to choice topics for the group. We know that one of the things that is critical for teachers to be effective in their classroom is having that opportunity to work with peers who teach at the same developmental and curriculum areas. And so for the 4th PLC, we really left it open-ended for your individual group to work as a team to have some discussions around the topics that they choose. We do have topics that people have brought up in the surveys, really a focus on curriculum, resources, instruction were all highlights that we saw for individual groups, but I know that most groups that we saw looked like they had already come up with some ideas of they'd like to continue it. And so as facilitator, one of the things that we'd ask you to do is have a short discussion at the beginning about those areas or topics that they would like to work as a group, and then be able to help to bring them to talk through those topics over the final remaining period to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to have some discussions in areas that they choose. And so this is really an open-ended opportunity. If you don't feel comfortable or feel that your group had a lot of discussions in this area, feel free to contact me, and we will review and be able to give you some feedback on maybe some topics that we saw in the surveys from your groups.